Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I thank Governancenow, Pragya, and all the team for giving this opportunity. Though after lunch, it is difficult because when we go to our staff colleges, we find people are, it is difficult for the people. But anyway, I'll not take much time, nor my small address will be too technical. I am from law. So for me, this is really a learning experience, but your topic says demystifying the cloud. Meaning thereby we want to simplify what is cloud. We want to remove the mist. You see what happens when we use a computer without any server, without any internet, it is only one computer you are using. When you add server, you are connecting to internet, you are working on one system, one unit. When you need more, you are having different servers, different units, which is called cluster. When you are having at different places, different cities, various servers, it becomes grid. Combination of cluster and grid becomes cloud. This is what I could understand. And for my legal friends, I think this is more simpler. Anyway, now the thing is, the companies like Microsoft, even Google, Toyota, they are having their own clouds. And they are providing these services to big companies. Yes, I agree. Using cloud is easier. But since I'm a banker, I'll like to raise one thing. Which bank will like to give their data to a cloud which is hosted by others? Because our data are confidential, we have to maintain confidentiality. Citibank is having their own clouds. Though Indian law, Information Technology Act provides everything, yes, we have our law which is applicable in India, and the offenses committed outside the world are also covered under that. Though process may be lengthier, but it can be done. So either say as far as the banks are concerned, they will have to have their own clouds to maintain secrecy, to have the data with. You will say, no, it is secure. Data protection is there. But the fact is the server, the service provider, they will be having access to the data. How to protect that? Because as per Indian law, we cannot disclose. We have to maintain secrecy of the data of our customers. So anyway, these are the issues which the cloud owners, they have to address. Thank you very much.
Very timely for Nitza. I think your session is well timed with the opening remarks, right?
Yes, and perfect with the questions by Mr. Shrikant. So what we're going to do now is talk a bit about some of these pillars that are really our foundation and where we're going with our cloud and how we differentiate it. But in particular, I'm just going to talk about that a couple of minutes. Then Apurv Mehta is going to talk about, yeah, okay, he's there. He's going to talk about just the regulatory landscape for banks here in India. Okay, and we're going to talk about the specific commitments, and also how we back a bank's commitment on confidentiality. What are the commitments we do? We talked about encryption of data. So there are things that we do to back up your confidentiality obligation. Okay, so that's just a bit of what we will be discussing now. Okay, so, okay. So most of the discussion so far has been focused on security, or at least you've been able to hear about some security features that we have used. Now I want to talk about three things pretty quickly: privacy, compliance, and transparency. By privacy, I mean, what do we do to make sure your data remains private, okay, even though you have a cloud provider that's using the data? The second one is compliance, as to how we can help enable you comply, and what are the things that we build into the service to help you do that analysis, and how we work with that. And then transparency. you know, when you have your own cluster or your own server, and you can hug your server at night, and you can look at it and wave at it and control it, from that to actually having a server in a farm where you don't know all the information, that creates a certain anxiety, right? Particularly for those industries that have a lot of important information. So what are the things that we're doing as a cloud provider to really try to provide transparency and actually allow you to understand how things work and make that process more, easier, okay? I don't know what's going on. Oh, here we go. Okay. So basically, when we talk about privacy, we basically focus on, I would say, two main things, okay? The first one is, what are our own restrictions internally with respect to the use of the data, okay? There are certain commitments we make. You know, the data will only be used to provide the service. We will not be mining that data to make money out of it, to do advertising out of it. None of these things. You only use the data to provide the service. That's one thing. The second thing is, what are the restrictions that we ourselves put on the access to that data? And this is, again, part of the confidentiality. Did you know there is not a single person at Microsoft that is authorized to see all of the data of any customer? And some of our clouds have over 50 million customers, right? No one has the access on day one. First of all, does not have the keys to the kingdom. You cannot, not only for one person, but for all of the customers. There are these restrictions, and we have this thing called a customer lockbox that basically requires that each person that wants to gain access to the data, be it an engineer or a support person, actually goes, this is software related, goes in and requests access to a particular part of data and why. Then the machine does a study to make sure that that person has been background checked, that the person has been fingerprinted, and that the person has taken the latest trainings on security and the management of data, that that person is who he says or she says she is, and then they get access for only a limited period of time for that specific piece of data, and it's time bombed. And so right after you're supposed to be done, you lose access to the data. So these are the kinds of things that we're doing internally to make sure that, you know, we protect you and we protect ourselves against, you know, the insiders, right? Because a lot of people are worried about protecting themselves against who's coming from the outside, right? This prevent breach mentality. But the truth is that when you're an insider and you're already in the network, you know, you can wreak greater havoc. So what are the kinds of things that we're doing in those two dimensions, okay? I would also like to say that in terms of access from third parties, I think this, and for us as lawyers, I think this becomes pretty relevant, right? Particularly within the context of law enforcement requests. We have a couple of slides here that we have prepared for you. Since Mr. Edward Snowden came into the light almost 2 years ago, we have been really thinking about, okay, what are the kinds of things that we need to do to give customers confidence that we as cloud providers are going to do the right thing and that we're going to keep the government in check, not only the US government, but other governments in check. And so this slide that has links, you're going to have access to this slide, really focuses on what is the scope of the government's ability to go in to get data with actual links to the regulations. And then what are the kinds of commitments that we make as a company to make you feel that we're doing the right thing for you. So I'm sorry that I'm having some difficulty here. Okay. So this is a flow chart that explains to you what happens when Microsoft receives a third-party request from a law enforcement agency, for example. And these are embedded in our commitments to you. And we also audit against each of these commitments, okay? Because we have our data centers here in India, your primary or secondary data center is going to be here, we're able to basically commit to you that if we get a third-party request for your data, okay, we will actually always redirect that third party to go back to you and actually contest that, that request from that third party as well. So we have a team of lawyers in Redmond. In the US, all they do is analyze, okay, what's the request? Did they follow the right rules? Go back to the person who really owns the data, because we don't own the data. Okay, go back to them and really fight them every step of the way. And to tell you how successful we have been in doing that, in the past 6 months, we've had 6 law enforcement requests from the American government for enterprise data. And we were able to reject every single request we got from the US government. They went straight to the owner of the data, okay? So the numbers are really low. In addition to that, we've never gotten a request under a national security order for enterprise data either, okay? So, you know, we work really hard, really hard to make sure that governments are doing what they should be doing and that they follow the law when they come to us as a service provider to request information, okay? And so this, we don't have a lot of time, and I'm happy to, you know, discuss this more with you. But this gives you a sense of, okay, we get the request, what is it that Microsoft does? You know, redirect or not? And then, you know, what are the things that we do to make sure that we're protecting that data and keeping it confidentially? The other thing that I already shared some data with you. But when you're looking at a cloud provider, right, I mean, we work for Microsoft, right? But when you're thinking about what we're saying, I really like you to think about, okay, what are the kinds of things that Microsoft is doing that I need to evaluate other providers against, right? What am I learning about the cloud and about the practices that Microsoft does that I can actually use when I'm actually doing some kind of evaluation moving forward, okay? So that's also part of the idea in this conversation. On the compliance front, the way Microsoft has been working on compliance, I would say there's 3 elements to that process. One is constantly building a least common denominator for all of its users that's higher than anyone else's, okay? The other one is getting input from regulators as to what it will take for people to be able to move to the cloud, okay? And the third piece of this process is how can we really do it in a scalable way, okay? And so here I'm going to share with you fairly quickly before we go into the discussion of local law. Hey, who's helping us with? I did go to the right click, but I keep getting, you see it doesn't go either. Oh. Okay, then actually, I thought something else was coming, but we're going to have now Apurva come talk to you about the Indian guidelines and regulations, and then I'll come back to wrap it up. I thought something else is coming. Here you go. You're good? Oh, I'm sitting here. Okay.
So thank you, Mr. So Shrikant. So you sort of pointed out about the Indian regulations. And I'm here to sort of talk a bit about some of the myths for which we have about the Indian regulation, especially the banking regulations, which says you can't go to the cloud. What we have done as Microsoft, we try to analyze some of the banking regulations, what we can understand, and our view is there are no regulations which clearly say you can't go to the cloud. And I'm going to talk about these 6 items in the next couple of slides. One is really the Indian IT Act and the privacy rules, which really talk about how we should take care of privacy. The second concern is because there are no cloud guidelines, we are trying to rely on the closest technology outsourcing guidelines. And this is a 2006 document which talks about what you should consider when you are outsourcing. And in 2011, RBI came out with the Gopal Krishna Committee report, which talks about cyber frauds in electronic banking. And that's, in my view, what we've heard from our banking customers, one of the key guidelines which they are looking at. And not the least is also some report from IDRBT, which is more of a consulting white paper, which clearly identifies cloud as one of the technologies or leading technologies or paradigm shift technologies, which we expect will sort of lead to a mass innovation in the banking and help bank really reduce the cost of ownership or cost per transaction and make that financial inclusion which Mr. Modi or Prime Minister Modi has vision of. How does that sort of help fulfill using technologies like cloud? Not the least, also have something on the IRDA guidelines, which are the insurance regulatory body, in terms of what they are saying. Again, for us, the closest view we had to rely on is the outsourcing guidelines, and of course the general procurement policies. So I'll talk a bit about the Indian IT Act. What really says, and this is section 43 of the Act, really talks about the privacy the privacy rules, which talks about you can't have a secondary use of that data. And as a service provider, as Nitza also pointed out, through deep contractual commitments, Microsoft puts it into the agreements. We do not mine your data. To the point is the secrecy requirement. So for us, you are as important as another small organization or another larger organization. So for us, we commit that we comply with the regulation of the land, and we do not mine your data for any purpose. Our engineers, if they need to fix a server, we will only give them time-bound access with your permission. You will have a pre-notification about it, but we do not touch your data, and we do, by the way, thorough background checking of all our contractors, of all our IT admin staff at those data centers. And data centers are generally, I mean, they're huge rows with only blinking lights. These are unmanned data centers. This is lights down. There's nobody there. So that's how we manage a huge hyperscale public infrastructure. Talking about the other requirements of the privacy rules is about confidentiality of data, and about subcontracting. What are the obligations of a subcontractor when you're providing it? Microsoft takes complete ownership of the subcontractors. Any acts what they do, we regularly audit our subcontractors. And again, for us subcontracting, maybe for example, if this is the data center room and there are some servers which are blinking in the back end, we don't, Microsoft may be responsible to run that, but we may be using some of the IT, we may be using some air conditioning suppliers who are providing the necessary cooling required for this equipment, or some other facility administrative services which are helping to efficiently run these. So those are samples of subcontractors which we use, and again, we go through a thorough due diligence process how we appoint them, and we are responsible for their actions. Also, we transparently communicate through you, and this is available on our website, who are our subcontractors. Should you have any concerns, we give you the flexibility to leave the service. But we are very clear about it. We share it transparently with you. We have nothing to hide. In this business, that's how we want to gain trust. Talking about the RBI outsourcing guidelines, and this really is the key. What Gopal Krishna Committee report really pointed out is, and it also identified cloud as one of the leading technologies apart from mobile banking, which would help digital inclusion, financial inclusion in a big way. What it really talks about, go to cloud with a caution. It doesn't say don't go. And what is the caution? Make sure you have detailed contract. How is the service provider managing your data? What is his responsibility? What are the confidentiality provisions? What if a breach happens? What sort of certification is the service provider ready to commit? The standard which they have provided is our IT folks will sort of certify that is one of the highest gold standards, is ISO 27001. And so Microsoft goes even a step further. We are a leader when it comes to certification. There was in September last year, there was a new certification launch which is called 27018. This is primarily for cloud service providers. This addresses the same concerns that there is no secondary use of data. You will be transparent about it, and privacy will be protected. And those are the things which we were the first ones who sign up on that, and we can sort of share with you those certifications, which help sort of benefit your requirement to your regulators, RBI, in terms of how are we compliant. So these are the certification available from our cloud service provider that we can share with you. And it really sort of talks about have a degree of control where you have a clear plan in terms of managing the risk, but have a clear plan in terms of business continuity as well. How does the service provider do backup? So fortunately, in the Microsoft service, we are very transparent about it. Should you elect an option, we can give you the 3 data centers. We can have one primary and the other one secondary. These are 1,200 kilometers apart, so it takes care of any force major activities or a natural calamity where there's an earthquake or a fire or a flooding. but we can really still have you can have business continuity. That gives you a lot more confidence to go with a larger reputed service provider than to go with somebody who's just providing an indigenous solution sitting in one small town of the country. And really having the rights for the regulator to be able to see this and experience it. We can give you some commitments which talks about how we share independent third-party audit reports with you, which are the large audit firms like the KPMG, Deloitte, PwCs of the world. They audit our data center regularly. And we provide you updated, detailed report. It's not a summary report. We provide you detailed report which can help you meet your compliance requirements internally, but also to your regulator. I'll talk a bit about the insurance IRDA guidelines, and I'm sorry, I don't have yet a slide here. So the IRDA guidelines on outsourcing really talk about, they have gone a step ahead and described what is material core functions and what are non-core functions. They have identified as IT as a non-core function and clearly said those activities which are non-core to running an insurance business can be outsourced. And that means IT can probably go to a service provider. However, we had this unfavorable judgment or misinterpretation of the judgment in one of the insurance cases. This is a MetLife case. MetLife is a US and an Indian company joint venture operating out here. And for them, IRD had imposed a fine of 76 lakhs on them. While you understand ULIPs in about 3 or 4 years ago, one of the most popular options, and they were heavily invested by the insurance companies to sell them, and they were ready to give any sort of margin to the distributors who would go around selling it. So there were counts of cross-selling, wrong selling, which MetLife had to pay a fine. They were paying huge corporate discount, corporate rebates to their partners, which was in violation of the local law, and they did not even have calculators for them. So how does a ULIP work? You put the money today, your hard-earned money into the ULIP today. You get a NAV value. It's based on today. However, the calculators were not based here. Being a joint venture, their calculators were based back in the New York. The calculation happened at tonight. What happened in the time difference between this and the forex change? People were losing money. Apparently, with the data available, investors lost close to 7 crore rupee because the calculators were not based here, and the net asset value, the stocks would come to you on the next day, and which was identified as one of the key lapses of insurance, that you are taking money today, but you are giving them at tomorrow's value, and that's where the customer is losing out. Our regulators have had the vision, and they've been sort of trying to get people into the corrective mode. And the next one was when the regulator asked them for information while they had their main primary data was sitting out of the US. Firstly, they did not even, they were not ready to share it. They had a backup copy in Bangalore. They were not ready to share it because they felt, what is the protocol? And again, this is very true for most of our banking customers, what we have heard. Should there be an incident breach, even at the own data center, a lot of them even don't have policies. How will you handle data breaches, investigations, reporting back to the regulator? How will you deal with it when it comes to reporting to your own customers what data was breached? So there were similar examples which happened here, and as a reason, IRDA imposed another 5 lakh rupee fine on them because they did not even make the data available to a regulator available immediately. So those are the things that I wanted to sort of focus on. While it says, the nutshell of the summary is, it doesn't, insurance case at IRDA doesn't say you cannot go to the cloud. All it says is you need to have the right control mechanics in place, documented, have a business continuity plan, and SLA with a service provider. With that right safeguards, you can go to the cloud. With that, I would sort of hand over back to, a bit about the IDRBT, which came out in August 13 with this white paper, really identifying cloud as a key technology. We all understand IDRBT is also one of the influencers when it goes to research in banking technology. So that's where we are sort of trying to look at what are they saying about cloud. While they have identified it as a trend, they have also clearly called out what needs to be addressed in any bank considering to go to the cloud. What is the confidentiality obligation the service provider is ready to commit to? And again, all the models which Pali explained, is it a private cloud, is it a hybrid cloud, is it a public cloud? Across these three, the parameters really remain the same. Your risk levels will change, and you need to have a mitigation plan on that? What's the data integrity story and the availability story around each of those models? And authorization and audit both by the organization, importantly by the regulator. I'll sort of skip the slide. We already spoke about the IT rules. I'll hand it back to Nitza to talk about the service portal.
Thank you. Okay, so this slide basically, when I spoke about one of the 3 ways that we're approaching compliance, one of them was taking this least common denominator to basically everyone who's receiving the service, right? This is what Pali was talking about. I mean, this is a service that's, for billions of people, eventually. So what we have done is, basically we have our own, what I call Christmas tree. For those of you, I'm a Christian, so I'm always looking at my Christian analogies. So we took this ISO 27001, this information security management standard, which is the gold standard, and we implemented that in 2008. And we basically had only 36 controls. Today we have 1,100 controls. We've taken that original standard, as it's kept improving we've modified it, we've added privacy as well because it was not made for the cloud. And each time we agree to comply with the latest regulations, for example, in Europe, we actually build those controls to demonstrate that we're complying as part of the audits, okay? So this is just a list, an example list of the certifications that we actually have incorporated into these, into the operation of these services, okay? Here you will see ISO, which I just mentioned. There's some work that we've done for the United States government, for the UK federal government as well, and there's also some industry-specific standards that we've used, okay? Now, the only industry in the world for which we have developed this thing called the Regulator Right to Inspect and the Financial Services Program is the financial services industry. And basically, we've been meeting with over 60 financial services regulators from around the world. We've also met with RBI, of course, but with these regulators, we've sat down with them to get feedback as to what are the key concerns they have and what can we do as part of this provider of cloud, this new technology, to help those banks comply, and the most important thing, to be able to maintain this regulator's ability to supervise its banks, right? Because if the bank just outsources everything and then the regulator has lost its rights to supervise, that's not going to work for them, right? So we've been working for them, how do we scale and at the same time protect your regulator right to audit or whatever rights you have as a supervisory power. And so this is how we came up with this thing called we have a financial services amendment, and we also have a compliance program, where basically what we've done is we've shared even more information about the way the services are run. We share even more information about our vulnerabilities. We actually let banks come together and give us a number of controls to incorporate into our services every year. So they get together twice a year. They give us feedback as to where they want the service to go. What are they going to be their regulatory needs? We actually sit down with them. They tell us we need these 3 controls, and then we basically incorporate them into our control set, and off we go moving forward. So this industry today has the ability to tell us in what direction do we need to go in the areas that you care about from a regulatory perspective, okay? So, I mean, I'm delighted that we're doing that. That's what it takes to sell to financial services. And when you're looking at other cloud providers as well, I mean, these are the kinds of things that you should be thinking about. Am I going to be able to, at the end of the day, keep my regulator happy, grow my business, innovate, move as agile as I need to be here in India and in the world, but at the same time complying with my obligations. This is an example of, we have something called a Service Trust Portal, where you can see all of our controls. You can see the penetration testing results. You can see all the work we're doing, again, to provide more transparency so that you can do an analysis of whether we can help you comply with your policies and the law. And we have teams at Microsoft, and Pali knows this because he works with Azure, where we will actually work and partner and go to the regulator